This has and always will be a very special spot on the east coast of Australia, and for the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation, this very spot right here is known as Cavern Bar, meaning meeting place. But it's not just a meeting place. Through history, it's been an eating place. And the evidence for that is found over here in these sand dunes in the form of a ginormous midden. Looking over the clear blue waters, something came along once upon a time in 1770 that disturbed this timeless view. Something strange on the horizon out at sea. It was a ship called Endeavour, the first one that may have been seen along this east coast that we know of in history. For the people on the shore, this would have been a very bizarre sight. We can only imagine what they thought of it and what they called it. But for those on the ship looking back on the land, we do know what they called it because it's written down in their logs. After Captain Cook, the next vessel to pass through these waters was not so much a ship as it was a boat. And on board were not so much sailors as they were escaping convicts from the small, struggling penal settlement of Sydney, nearly 1,000 kilometres south. Now, this little mission was led by two convicts, Mary and William Bryant, plus their two infant children and 7 other male convicts, all escapees of Sydney, who'd actually stolen the governor's cutter. A cutter is a longboat, 6 oars, small mast, little sail, and they're going to take it all the way from Sydney, following this treacherous coastline full of Pacific rollers smashing in. They had a terrible time in this boat. Things kept breaking, water kept spilling in, they had to keep bailing it out. Mary's taking care of her 2 tiny little children, and they had to keep stopping into shore all the way up the coastline to pick up fresh food and water, see what they could find from the bush and from the marine life on these rocks. Now, we're not quite sure if they stopped into Byron Bay, but it makes a lot of sense after passing through this rocky area with waves smashing over the top that they'd find themselves in a safe, secure harbour, somewhere they could lay anchor, they could rest, sleep, fish, and perhaps even go ashore and try and find some food and water. If they did, perhaps these escapees, these voyagers coming all the way up on this tiny vessel, bumped into the Arakwal people here on the beach at the meeting place of Byron Bay. Perhaps we had a meeting of peoples from completely different worlds, far before the earliest European settlers started to move in and mingle with Aboriginal people on their land here. We do know that they headed north, continued past the Great Barrier Reef, stopped into the Whitsundays for some turtle meat, and then continued all the way to Cape York and turned into the Torres Strait. Now that's an incredible feat on its own, but they had a map which was actually the product of Cook's journey that he'd produced after sailing along this coast of New South Wales. And that map was going to see them all the way through the Torres Strait to the destination they were aiming for. That destination was called Kupang, a Dutch colony in West Timor. That's a distance of over 5,000 kilometres. And these escapees, these convicts, are going to reach Kupang, and when they do, pretend to be survivors from a shipwreck, a merchant vessel that went down. And it gave credence to their story that they had Mary with her 2 little kids, and they had a map. You know, surely they weren't prisoners of the crown. They looked like survivors, heroic survivors of this shipwreck. So the Dutch took them aboard in their colony, paid for their expenses, and they had a merry old time. Months went by and they were free citizens living in this little colony there, until unfortunately Mary's husband, William Bryant, supposedly spilled the beans, letting out their secret of who they really were whilst he was drunk one night at a Dutch tavern. And that was the end of that. They were arrested, put back into the cells, and the Dutch are going to hand them over to the English authority, to the Navy, and slowly but surely that party of escaped convicts are going to be sent all the way back to England to face re-trial. Unfortunately, one by one, many of them will perish along the way. Perhaps if they had have stayed in the beautiful clear waters of Byron Bay and not made that journey north, it would have been a different story. I know where I'd like to be. I'm Max Burns-McRuvie, a local guide and historian of Byron Bay and the hinterland behind it, and I can't wait to share more stories and scenery with you.